Hello. Thanks for having me here. My name is Jamie Spinelli, and I am the Homeless Response Manager for the City of Vancouver. And today I'm going to be sharing a bit about our strategies for managing encampments in Vancouver. So this is just an overview of what I'm going to cover today. I'll share a bit about my role at the city and explain the current lay of the land as it pertains to homelessness in Vancouver. I'll give a quick rundown of how we've added shelter and safe parking capacity, and then I'll go into more detail about the city's outreach team, what managing encampments looks like to us, and the role community court plays in that. And then I'll share some broad outcomes that we've seen from these strategies. And then I wanted to speak just a little bit on how valuable it's been for us to incorporate the knowledge and experiences of the people we're trying to serve, as well as people who have former experience with challenges often related to homelessness into the work we're doing. So my background is in street outreach with a focus on those chronically unsheltered and experiencing significant mental health and or substance use disorders. Full disclosure, I am also in long-term recovery myself, and I'm sharing this because these are some of the lenses that I kind of naturally view the problem and potential solutions through. So my job is essentially to address unsheltered homelessness and its impacts in a way that balances the needs of the entire community, housed, unhoused, businesses, etc. And specifically, that looks like managing the city's homeless assistance and resources team, which is the city's own outreach team that I'll touch more on later. I develop and implement overall plans and strategies to address unsheltered homelessness and its impacts and provide recommendations to council and city management for all of those things. The chart here on the right shows our sheltered, unsheltered, and chronic homelessness numbers from 2015 to 2023, collected from our annual point in time counts. And you can see that we are trending up in each category. Since 2019, we've had more people experiencing homelessness outside than inside, and it's taking much longer to move folks from homelessness to housing. I think notably, chronic homelessness increased 54% from last year, and chronic unsheltered homelessness jumped 78% from last year. So I don't actually work on affordable housing directly, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention the primary driver of increases in homelessness, which I'm sure at least many of your communities are also experiencing. This crisis can and does lead to what our city manager quite rightly referred to as a crisis of hopelessness recently. Homelessness itself can feel very hopeless, but it can also feel very hopeless to be faced with data and or actual experiences like this as an individual. People are having to spend more and more of their income on housing and basic needs. Wages have not kept up with cost of living, so people are having to work multiple jobs just to keep a roof over their heads, which contributes to quality of life challenges. And more folks are having to move away from their hometowns to places that are more affordable, which can then disconnect them from support systems. While affordability may not be the cause of homelessness for everyone who ends up living outdoors, we do know that homelessness will not be solved without adequate affordable housing. What I do know, though, is that once someone reaches a place of literally having no shelter, no matter what the reason is, it's significantly harder to get out of homelessness. Even if we had plenty of affordable housing tomorrow, we would still have folks living outside because often people become homeless for one reason, but struggle to get back inside for other reasons because of the challenges they develop while they're living outside. Unsheltered homelessness has significant impacts on the entire community, but profound impacts on the individuals experiencing it. I think we all see or experience impacts like increases in trash, personal property stored outside, and sometimes drug paraphernalia in public spaces that are intended to be used for recreation or other public use. In our city, we are cleaning up about 500,000 tons of solid waste per year solely related to homeless encampments. But people literally living in it are experiencing things like rapid deterioration of mental and physical health, addiction, and all that comes with that. Things like shame, loss of connection, and inability to care for their basic needs, withdrawals or fear of them, and of course, overdosing, particularly in the current fentanyl crisis. They're living in very unsafe and unhealthy conditions, exposed to the elements, which could be heat, could be cold, could be smoke, violence, more interactions with law enforcement than a lot of people. And they experience a variety of barriers to accessing healthcare and services, which only contributes to the high mortality risks of people experiencing homelessness. There was a recent study that came out of the University of Chicago, I think spring of this year, that really studied kind of long-term mortality risks of the homeless population. And some of the things that they reported on were that non-elderly people who have experienced homelessness face 3.5 times higher mortality risk than people who are housed, and that accounts for differences in demographics and geography. Homelessness is associated with 60% greater mortality risk than poverty alone. And homeless individuals without formal employment, those with lower incomes, and those without family connections are especially vulnerable. Locally in Vancouver, we typically lose around 25 people a year to death while experiencing homelessness. I think last year at the end of the year, we reached 23. But as of August of this year, we're at 22, and many of those are due to overdose. So it's very likely that our total number is going to be increasing this year. So obviously more housing is needed, but we all know that it's going to take years to build the amount of housing actually needed. So these are some of the strategies that we've implemented to help us address those kind of symptoms of homelessness that I just talked about. I'm going to touch on at least some of these a little bit, but I'm going to go into a little more detail about HEART, our encampment management strategy, and hopefully you can see that the thread that kind of runs through all of these strategies are health, safety and stability, barrier reduction, and compassion paired with accountability. And I want to make sure that I note that that's for the entire community, not just those who are living outdoors. So to address those impacts, we previously talked about and kind of balance the needs of the entire community as best we can. The goal was to rapidly increase shelter capacity, establish some safe parking for those who are living in vehicles, build out a multidisciplinary city outreach team, which we call HEART, and develop and implement an encampment management strategy, which kind of included launching a community court program, which I'll touch on in a little bit. So the shelter capacity we've added comes in the form of what we call safe stay communities. They're called other things, other places. I know Portland's got some that are called safe rest villages. In Vancouver, these are small 20-unit pallet shelter villages, equitably spaced around the city and managed by contracted local nonprofits. We have 2 currently open and another 2 in construction. And while we've seen some great successes with these spaces, I want to point out that the intent of these spaces is to provide safer, more humane conditions for people to live in as they work to transition out of homelessness, access recovery supports, get back to work, address their health, etc. While some folks certainly do exit homelessness from these spaces, we do also know that these sites, particularly with how small they are, will not be the solution to homelessness in Vancouver or anywhere else. And that photo in the slide, that's I believe that's our second site actually. Similarly to the safe stays, Safe Park provides a safe and stable place for people to be as they move forward. This helps keep city streets and parking available for all public use and ensures that these folks aren't being moved around by law enforcement, wasting money on gas, moving around all day, and provides a place for folks to connect to services and kind of launch from. This has been a really excellent partnership with CTRAN. They own the property that it sits on, and they've been really great to work with. So because we knew it would be a while before we had enough housing, shelter, or safe parking capacity, we needed a way to better manage the impacts of everyone still left outside or in vehicles, and to kind of bring order to the disorder, I guess. So we built out the Homeless Assistance and Resources Team, or HART, and that is this team of superheroes in that picture. HART's made up of staff from the city manager's office, the police department, and public works. I manage the team. We have 2 dedicated outreach specialists, Lonnie and Steven, that focus on constant engagement, connecting people with services, and referring folks into safe stays, safe park, or other shelter options, sometimes recovery, housing, or treatment. Sheila's our encampment response coordinator, and I'm just going to preface the description of her with she's like a magical unicorn. So if you can find yourself a Sheila, you should do so. She also provides outreach services in addition to assessing camps for cleanup and sanitation needs, and then coordinating the work to meet those needs. And then Tyler is our HART officer. His primary role, just like the rest of the team, is outreach and engagement. But he also kind of acts as risk management for us when we need to provide notices to folks, store property, give citations, etc. He ensures that what we're doing is constitutional, it's legal, and that we're protecting people's civil rights. So I previously mentioned that HART helps to bring order to the disorder, and the disorder is definitely not just outside in encampments. For many years, the city's response was very uncoordinated and very enforcement heavy, neither of which are effective. Additionally, community members had no single point of contact for issues related to homelessness, which made law enforcement kind of the default. One of the things that I've learned since coming to the city is that homelessness touches pretty much every single city department. I have meetings with folks in the city that I never dreamed I would be having meetings with. But prior to 2021, most of those departments, while dealing with homelessness, they were not coordinating their efforts kind of amongst themselves or really even talking to each other. So oftentimes you'd have police sweeping encampments or cleaning encampments without even, attempting to discuss things with the nonprofits that are contracted to provide services and assist those encampments. I would also note that removing a camp might temporarily leave a clean spot, but it does nothing to move the needle on homelessness in general, and it's very destabilizing to individuals trying to survive outside. So having a team that spans multiple departments has helped tremendously with coordinating and kind of streamlining city efforts and resources. The entire team is also very connected to and coordinates with the rest of the homeless crisis response system, as well as behavioral health teams to meet the needs of folks living outside. One of the cool things about this team is that no one carries a caseload, and there's good reason for that. There's some research that shows that it takes at least 17 positive contacts before someone experiencing chronic homelessness may decide to engage in services. The rest of the community outreach teams, the nonprofit teams that exist here, all have maximum caseload sizes of around 15 to 20 people. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's an appropriate size because they're doing more intensive case management. But if that's all we have in the way of outreach, which is how it was prior to HART, that leaves hundreds of people not engaging, not being engaged at all, or going very long periods of time between actually connecting with the system. Because my team focuses on frequent and consistent engagement, we're able to reach those higher numbers of positive contacts more frequently with folks and ensure that they're staying connected to the system in some way. So as I previously mentioned, while we're doing outreach, we're also assessing all camps for cleanup and sanitation needs. That could look as basic as dropping off trash bags so folks can bag up their trash for us to pick up later. It could look like placing porta potties and dumpsters near larger encampments, or it can sometimes look like larger scale cleanup efforts that require front loaders and crews to come in and remove solid waste that's built up at camps. This picture on the slide is from a cleanup done in 2016, long before I was working for the city or before HEART existed. And that's Tyler and I basically doing a lot of the work that I just described, but kind of unofficially, right? Because it was effective. This gentleman was camping outside of a local shelter. It's hard to see her, but the shelter director is behind that truck canopy. And the three of us were attempting to coordinate various resources for this gentleman, as well as attempt to work with him on his hoarding issue. And he had a variety of needs. He was a vet. He had heart problems. He had a hoarding issue. He needed to move. And I think that this shows a couple of things. One, the needs of each individual are unique and complex. It's almost never just one thing that someone needs, which is why no single entity will solve homelessness. And two, we will also not solve homelessness without law enforcement, but law enforcement can and should be part of the landscape when used and trained appropriately. So developing this strategy, as I guess described in the last slide, since Tyler and I have been doing this together since 2016, is really something that's kind of happened over time. So what we noticed along the way is that we were essentially kind of sifting through the folks that we were coming across. There still are very clearly many people who were asking for help, waiting for help, and doing the very best they could, even if they did have some personal challenges to overcome. However, there was also clearly a more criminal or predatory element that we would come across in or around some camps. And I want to be real clear that I'm not saying that all people experiencing homelessness are criminals. Certainly, some people experiencing homelessness commit crimes, just as people in houses commit crimes. But encampments and vulnerable people can also be preyed upon by people who aren't homeless at all, or by people who kind of utilize the cover of homelessness to commit crimes. And so as kind of part of this sifting process, it was important for us to lead with outreach and services to kind of determine who is it that's interested and willing to engage, and who is not, so we could figure out where to focus our efforts. And that has included the creation of new services like the Safe Stays and the Safe Park, because we wanted to ensure, as we were kind of moving through this process, as much as possible, that we had solutions to meet a variety of needs and preferences for folks who were seeking help or even just willing to consider getting some help. Our first Safe Stay, for example, was the first shelter in Clark County that allowed couples without children. And it was also the first non-congregate shelter in Clark County. So these sites were able to serve folks that were not being served prior to their opening in 2021. So having these kinds of services and supports available helps us with that sifting process, so that we're not just kind of harassing folks that would participate in services if the kind of services they needed existed. So as people are camping, we continually monitor for health and safety issues and address those as needed. we created some camping expectations with the blessing of our legal department, and we passed those out liberally so that everyone has a very clear understanding of the kinds of things that are not acceptable when living outdoors on public property. And we've worked to ensure that those expectations are not unreasonable or above and beyond the kinds of things expected of anyone else existing on or visiting public spaces. For example, we can't just build structures, in a city park. No one can do that. If after receiving the expectations being given notice that expectations are being met and being given time and or tools to correct the situation, someone just does not comply, then they will be cited into community court, which I will explain shortly. If their citation is due to having more belongings than can be reasonably managed, which is called unlawful storage on public property, we will store someone's belongings for up to 60 days to give them time to find adequate storage that is not on public property. Now, we don't just go tossing things like identification or medication, but we will not just perpetually store 50 bicycles, furniture, things like that. So this is the actual camping expectation sheet that we hand out to everyone. I recognize it might be kind of small on a screen. Some of this is just reminders about relevant local laws and ordinances regarding where camping is expressly prohibited. So like in our community, it's parks, schools, libraries, within 1,000 feet of safe stays or safe parks, within 200 feet of water, no blocking sidewalks, things like that. The portion that I circled in red is a requirement for people to be working on exiting homelessness or at least being accepting of shelter as it becomes available. And we recognize that what it takes to exit homelessness will look different for everyone. This was truly created as a way to focus on those who, for whatever reason, are more resistant to engagement, as well as hold accountable those folks who are just out there committing crimes. I will say this portion of the expectations is something that I get a great deal of pushback on from some service providers or people who consider themselves advocates, because they just kind of fundamentally disagree with pushing people to move indoors if they want to live outside. While generally speaking, I agree that people should have as much autonomy and the right to self-determination as possible. It's just also true that there are some limitations to the choices that people can make while they are on public property. I would also say that while not every person experiencing homelessness uses drugs, it has been my observation, and not just mine, the observation experience of my team as well, particularly over the last couple of years, that most people living unsheltered are using. And as of late, the majority of that is fentanyl. And as a person in recovery, I remember what it was like to believe that I could manage or stop my addiction on my own terms and in my own way. And just spoiler alert, that did not work. I eventually recognized and accepted that my best judgment led me to maintaining a heroin addiction. So it was necessary for a time to substitute someone else's judgment for my own until my head cleared and my judgment became better. But because we like to pair accountability with high amounts of support, in April this year, we launched a community court. Community courts are similar to other therapeutic courts like drug court, mental health court, veterans court, in that they're designed to be supportive versus punitive. In this case, people are cited into community court for low-level crimes commonly associated with homelessness. So things like unlawful camping, unlawful storage of property, blocking a sidewalk, trespassing, things like that. But the beauty of this court is that it's held at a location in the community that is not a courthouse. We hold ours in the Recovery Cafe. We have it once a week, and on that day, the majority of local homeless service providers and behavioral health providers all attend court and are immediately available for individuals who've been cited in. If individuals opt in, because they do have that option, to this court, they are typically required to do 4 hours of community service, and that looks like gardening at one of our work centers. And then the rest of their service plan includes taking steps that have been identified by themselves as well as service providers needed to connect to services or reduce barriers to accessing service. An individual typically completes the program within 6 weeks, and once they complete, they get a fancy certificate and their charge is dismissed. As of September 11th, I believe, of this year, this is the data we've got so far. And truth be told, I was actually surprised at how many people bought into this. I really thought we'd have more people opting out, but it's actually been quite successful. And we've got folks who have graduated, who regularly come back to just kind of visit with everybody, still connect with service providers, and almost kind of like encourage the new folks, that it's not so bad and it's worthwhile hanging in there. So I'm not going to read each one of these, but I do believe we've seen some really great results from utilizing the strategies that I've talked about. We have more people in safer, supported, and stable spaces, and those spaces have contributed to some really fruitful partnerships as well as community building opportunities between housed and unhoused communities. We are more effectively and efficiently coordinating city resources. We are seeing reductions in calls for service from police specifically. And while we haven't yet solved homelessness, we have been more responsive to the health and safety needs and concerns of our community members as a city. And I think that goes for the housed community as well as the unhoused and business communities. So I know that I briefly touched on this a couple of times, but I cannot overstate how important it is to listen to and utilize the voice of lived experience when developing and implementing strategies to address these challenges. I know that I have mentioned my own recovery and how I view much of my work through that lens, but I also have permission to share that 2 other people on my team also have lived experiences with homelessness, substance use, justice involvement, and recovery. They are brilliant and talented people aside from that, but it is their lived experiences that make them uniquely qualified to do this work. And what is arguably the greatest contributing factor to the success of our team. In addition to my team, our Safe Stays and Safe Park are almost completely staffed with peers and others with their own lived experience, and the development of all of our homeless programs in my department have been informed by individuals currently living on our streets, as well as people with recent experiences with unsheltered homelessness in Vancouver who are now housed. So in recovery, we learn that the therapeutic value of one addict helping another is without parallel. And I have seen that also be true for recovering from homelessness, whether one is an addict or not. There is no one better to guide you out of a traumatic life experience than someone who has already successfully walked that path. That's the end of my presentation. Our communications department gave me a fancy QR code in case you want to read more about the HEART team.